All right, let's start. So we're at the beginning of Perek Lamed, chapter 30. Right? So, let's just summarize the previous chapter. So the previous Perek, the Alter Rebbe explained what a person should do, what the BINA should do, and of course, for sure, someone who's less than a BINA, what he should do if he's experiencing Timtum Halev. Timtum Halev was the blockage of the heart, right? Which is sort of preventing the person from having this feeling of being drawn to godliness, having Avas Hashem, the love of Hashem, and so on. And he said that it has to do with the Nefesh Habamis, the animal soul, that he's blocking the neshama. The neshama is not taking hold. And he brought the analogy from the Zohar, that if there's a piece of plank, a piece of wood, that's not catching fire, it's because it's too big and it's too thick. It needs to be splintered, it needs to be broken up. So he gave a whole bunch of strategies, essentially divided into two. The first part of the chapter and the second part of the chapter, how this can happen. The first part of the chapter really had to do with breaking oneself a little bit. In other words, splintering up oneself a little bit, for a good purpose, obviously. Dedicating time to reprimand and to sort of, not reprimand, but to like break the Nefesh Habamis, the animal soul. And he went into explain, because that is the person. For most people, that is the conscious person. The conscious person is not the Neshama, the conscious person is the Nefesh Habamis. And therefore you need to understand how the klippa has affected you, how just by being a Nefesh Habamis means that there's a certain klippa, there's a certain cover-up of Kedusha, and that means that you now are distant from Hashem, especially when you start to think about the things you might have done wrong in previous, early on in your life, or permitted indulgences, or thoughts, or whatever, and so on. He went on different types of ideas. Even if a person thinks he didn't do Averis when he was young, but not all these thoughts were holy and all that kind of stuff, all that has strengthened the blockage of the neshama. Perhaps also Hashem wants him to go to a higher tshuva, and therefore his tshuva today is not so accepted as it was, and so on and so forth. Then in the second part of the Perek, he talked about a second thing that you do, and that is once the neshama starts to take hold a little bit, then you switch and you sort of identify with the neshama. The neshama, so in an outward way, in a superficial way, the person is the nefesh habamis, right? Is the animal soul. But inwardly, we said it's the nefesh halakis, the godly soul, and therefore, now the godly soul can start talking. And he went through that whole idea of the godly soul screaming at the nefesh habamis. You're a low life. You're this. You're that. Right, and sort of minimizing its strength and its power to further take hold for the Timtum Halev to go away, the blockage of heart to go away, and for the Neshama to take hold. Okay, that was the previous chapter. Today, Perek Lamed, the 30th chapter, the Alter Rebbe goes into another strategy, how to do that. Right, and the commentary on Tanya used to explain that it's very specific, the order. In other words, the theme of this chapter is going to be humility, to be humble, right? And why does it come after the last chapter? Because even if a person really understand his lowliness or his distance from Hashem and so on, right? So that will be something, even if we accomplish exactly what we explained in the last chapter, we're going to come to that realization. That's a realization we come to between us and Hashem. It doesn't make us lower than other people. It could be that everyone's like that. Everyone's distant from Hashem. In other words, I can still have the feeling, okay, I'm distant from Hashem, I'm breaking my nefesh habamis, I'm putting it down, I'm splintering it so that the fire of the nefesh halakis can take hold, all of that. But still, I'm doing better relative to other people. I'm doing pretty well, right? Anyway, by the end of this chapter, we will have dispelled that myth, right? And that's the thing. Now, so let's see. So, Alter Rebbe says as follows. Oid, it's chapter 30, right? Oid yosim el liboy. Oid zois yosim el liboy. Furthermore, you should take to heart, says the Alter Rebbe. Like, in other words, to deal with the Timtum Halev. L'kayem maimer Azal, to fulfill the saying of Chazal. The Chazal tell us, I think it's in Pirkei Avos, if I'm not mistaken. Pirkei Avos. They have a shval ruach bifnei kol adam. You shall have a humble spirit, a lowly spirit, in the face of all humanity, all people, all adam. Right? Person should be humble before everyone. Now, what does that mean? Says the Alter Rebbe, it's not just like some commentaries explain. What it means is you should always, even if you're great and even if you're greater than other people, but you should always act in a humble way. Says the Alter Rebbe, no, that's not the pshat. Pshat is veheve be'emes la'amitoy. You should truly be humble. You should always consider yourself lower than other people. Why? And he says, bifnei kol ha'odam mamish, in front of all people, mamish all people, right? Afilu bifnei kal shebekal. Even before a person who's considered a kal shebekal. Now, I just need to explain the terms there. Let's just set the scene here. Alter Rebbe is talking to a BINA. All right? Again, we've explained this many times. He's talking to a BINA, but we can learn a lot from it because it certainly, whatever applies to a BINA, certainly applies to the aspiring BINA, right? But a BINA is pretty high up there. I mean, the person doesn't do Averis, he doesn't do anything he's not supposed to do, he learns all the time, he davens well, right? Okay, he's having a problem with Timtum Halev, but it's not bad, right? Contrast that with what the Alter Rebbe refers to as a kal shebekalim. I don't know how to translate it, but it means the guy's pretty low down there. I looked in the English Tanya. It says most religiously irreverent. I don't know what that means. Disregarding of like takes Torah mitzvahs lightly. Okay, there we are. Okay, so a person who's like, yeah, maybe he doesn't take things seriously, right? Okay. So he'll do an avera, he'll this, he'll that. He doesn't really care. I mean, he's Jewish, he's part of the community, maybe he's in TB, maybe even he's considered himself religious, but he doesn't really care, right? So that's a pretty big contrast, the Beinoni versus the Kal Shebekalim, right? I was thinking, by the way, as I was learning this parak, that the Kal Shebekalim, when we talk about the Kal Shebekalim, who the Alter Rebbe says is held responsible for himself, but we still have to be humble before him, as I'll soon explain. I don't think it's referring to what we call today people who aren't religious. Because we have a different category for all those people who don't do any mitzvahs. And that's today people just ignorant, they don't know, right? Kal Shebekalim is someone who knows and who just doesn't care, right? It's not hard to be humble before someone actually has made a shift in their life from knowing nothing. That's understood. But here we're talking about someone who's really a problem. In other words, he's a Kal Shebekalim. He knows, he's learned, he grew up that way, he knows what's right, and just doesn't care. Right? So I think that's the setting here. But even that person, which in a way is worse than the person who didn't know anything, it's not about how many mitzvahs a person does, it's about the attitude also. I'm saying, like, the person who grew up not knowing anything, we call it today even halachically it has a lot of consequences. We call it today the Tinok Shenishba, the captured child. Like the Gemara talks about a child that was captured among non-Jews and doesn't know better, right? Okay, anyway, whatever it is, I just thought that, that's my, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I think that's the truth. Okay. So he says, yeah, even a Kal Shebekalim. By the way, this idea that the Chazal tell us they have a shval ruach, should be humble before everyone, and the Alter Rebbe says it means really humble, not just act humbly, but actually really be humbled before each person. So the Friedrich Rebbe told a story that there was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe called Reb Shmuel Elia Mekalisk, and he once went into Yechidus to the Alter Rebbe. It was the first time he went into Yechidus. He was a very big chassid, and he asked the Alter Rebbe questions about his service of Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe answered him what it says here in Tanya, that you should be truly humble before each person. Right? And he says, and he quoted what it says in the Tanya, Alter Rebbe quoted from his own Tanya, that it means emes lamitoy, like really truly, right? So after he heard this Chassid didn't go into Yechidus, even though it was available to him, but he didn't go into Yechidus with Alter Rebbe for 20 years. He decided until he can really internalize this message and really feel that way, he's not going back to the Alter Rebbe. Right? So he said he really needs to be able to understand it, to internalize it and feel it on all layers of his neshama. And even though he really wanted to go into Yechidus, but it took him 20 years to succeed, what he felt was really a sincere fulfillment of this instruction. And when he finished that, then he went into the Alter Rebbe again. Okay? Obviously, it's not on our level, which just shows you how hard this is, but nevertheless, this is the journey. Okay. Now, what does that mean? So like this. Why do we have to feel ourselves humble? Why does the BINA even have to feel humble before the Kal Shebekalim, right? The irreverent, what do you call it? First of all, he says, because you can't, the Alter Rebbe gives a couple of layers here, how this works. Number one, very simply, it's according to the saying of Chazal, do not judge someone else until you reach his place, right? Place could mean physical environment, the way he explains it here, it could be circumstance, whatever the case is, right? We have to think that yes, maybe he does more Averis than I do. Maybe he doesn't learn as much as I do, but it's his place, it's his environment that's causing him to fail. For example, he gives us this idea. He says, for example, talking about a Beini maybe that's spending hours of davening and learning and so on and so forth. And this Kal Shebekalim, he's in the marketplace, right? Leo's Parnasasi, where does he get his sustenance from? Leilech Bashuk Kolayim. He's walking in the marketplace the whole day. Not only that, it's two categories there. Someone that's in the marketplace running to do business, but then there's someone who's like in the corner of the marketplace, and he's half the day socializing with his friends, like he's more immersed in the marketplace environment, right? And therefore it's hard not to be influenced, right? And therefore what happens is, his eye sees all that he shouldn't see. We know a principle in Chazal, the eye sees and the heart desires. And Yitzroi, and his Yetzirah, boyer kesanur, boyer ba'oife. So Pasuk he quotes here, his Yetzirah is burning with an unbelievable fire. He's got a very strong Yetzirah. What do you want from the guy? Like it says in Hosea and Tanakh, who boyer ka'esh lahava, burning like a flaming fire, right? Okay. So therefore, the Beini thinks to himself, I think I'm so great. I think I'm so better than that person, right? The person only he goes once in a while. He has to do stuff in the market, right? He's giving a mashal of the shtetl of a market, but this can be applied to all circumstances. In fact, more today than before, right? The market today, as we call it, is terrible, right? The street. So as someone who doesn't frequent that much, most of the days at his house, and even gamki even if he does have to go frequently out, maybe your Yetzirah is not so burning. But certain people have stronger Yetzirahs than others. Because the Yetzirah is not equal to all people. Yes, Yetzirah, some have a more burning Yetzirah, some not. Mishan is the way it's explained in other places. In other words, he says, you don't know how you would be if you would be in that person's circumstance, maybe you'd be worse. That's the point, right? There's an interesting story in the Gemara that the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara were discussing a certain halacha. And a certain halacha, it had to do with the meal times, how you're supposed to cut the challah, the whole story. It was a difficult situation, that a difficult question, they couldn't solve it. So Rav Ashi, one of the great Talmudic sages, he went to sleep and he had a dream. And in that dream, King Menashe was a king during the first temple. And he was known as a big Rasha, actually, a big wicked person. Why was the King Menashe coming into him? Because, I remember the whole story now. Because there was a discussion in the Gemara about, it says, Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek le'olam haba. All Yidden have a portion of the world to come, and there are a few exceptions. And there's a discussion in the Gemara where the Melech Menashe, King Menashe, actually was so bad, maybe because he served idols, there was a terrible epidemic of pagan worship in the first temple, the first Beis Hamikdash, maybe he doesn't come to the Elam, even though he did tshuva at the end of his life. Maybe it wasn't good enough, whatever the case is, right? So then they had this question, and they were discussing this halachas of cutting bread, and that is this question. So King Menashe came to him in a dream, and in a brilliant Talmudic way, solved the question for him. So Rashi said to Melech Menashe, "You're such a Talmud Chacham. Why do you serve so much Avodah Zarah?" So he told him, he said like this was a good lesson. He said, I want you to know, if you would have lived in my time, I can tell you for sure, they used to wear long coats in those days. He says you would pick up the hem of your coat to be able to run faster to serve Avodah Zarah. Right? So like, don't judge. Right? Don't judge. It ties in with the Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara says there was a whole story where the Anshe Knesset Hagadolah, the men of the Great Assembly, saw the Yetzer Hara was very strong, so they wanted to kill the Yetzer Hara. They wanted to capture the Yetzer Hara, kill the Yetzer Hara. But it's a funny story. The Gemara says that they did that, they were successful, and then the next day there was no eggs to buy in the marketplace, there was nothing, because if there's no Yetzer Hara, there's also no physical desires, right? So they realized they did the wrong thing. This is not the way the world works. But they were successful, it says, in killing the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. In other words, we can't understand it today. I mean, there's different Avodah Zarahs today, but more spiritual ones, metaphorical ones. But actual pagan worship, to stand there and bow down to a getchka, I mean, that's like ridiculous, right? Although it's come back a little bit. They still do it in some parts of the world, but like in India. Right? But nevertheless, by and large, a regular Yid doesn't have a tithe. He doesn't have a desire to bow down or to pray to like a statue. Because but in times of the first presentation, it was still there. It says, so don't judge. Yeah. Okay, now, it says like this. He inserts now. He says, okay, so therefore the BINA has to be humble before that person, even the Kal Shulchan, because you don't know, he doesn't know how it would be if he'd be in that person's case. Okay. Now, in parentheses, Alter Rebbe says now, Hine, that doesn't mean that person is off the hook. In other words, there's a difference between how you view someone and how the person should view themselves. Right? He says, the truth is, even if someone is very fiery, any circumstance to have parnasses that he's sitting amongst all the low laughs in the marketplace, the truth is, he has no excuses. Or Mikra Rasha Gomer, and he's still called the Rasha, like we explained before. Because he has no fear of Hashem, right? Because the truth is, every Yid has the capacity to serve Hashem. Because he should have held himself back and he should have had self-control. Because the fear of Hashem, which we know will see all your deeds. Kimotion is like we said before, the brain rules the heart. That was the foundation of Tanya. In other words, like this, a person should never look at himself that way. So, I'm okay, I'm doing various, but I'm in the marketplace and this, that, and yeah, that's not the point. No, a person should be much harsher on himself than that, right? The person should know, I can control myself. Hashem sees everything I'm doing. I should do better. I should serve Hashem. I should not do various. Okay, that's the person's cheshbon, the person's calculation for themselves, right? But the way the BINA looks at that person, especially the BINA who is struggling with Timtum Alev and wants to sort of soften his nefesh abamis and splinter it a bit, he needs to understand that, you think you're so great, that's a problem, you're blocking. There's a sliver of arrogance in you, right? Which you have to deal with by becoming humble before every single person, even that person who's like that, the Kal Shulchan, because you don't know how you'd be if you'd be in that situation. Number one. Now, secondly, the Alter Rebbe says like this: the truth is, it's not about that he shouldn't judge. It's actually more than that. A person is to realize like this, that the truth is, the war with the Yetzer Hara is a very big war. It's a great war. It's a great struggle. That we know. Lishbar hayoytzer, to break the Yetzer Hara, haboer ka'esh lahava, which is burning very strongly with the fire. It's a real test, right? Yeah. Two, for himself, the Kal Shulchan needs to know that he has no excuses. But the truth is, he has no excuses because we're supposed to fight the war and we're supposed to overcome the war. But you need to know it's like a very big struggle, right? Therefore, because it's a struggle, therefore, every person at his level, or his place, his circumstance, Umadrigosa in his level b'avodas Hashem. Every person lishkol v'lifchoin ba'atzmoi. Every person should evaluate themselves and say to themselves, Imu oived Hashem be'erech u'bechinas milchama atzuma kazoi u'nisoyin kazeh. Do you fight the war? It's a question every single person has to ask themselves. Are you fighting the war? That could be a different war. But are you fighting it? Understand? What does that mean? Be'chinas va'asei tov. In the realm of doing good. What does that mean? Like this? We're talking about a BINA, right? So BINA doesn't do any averis. That's what we learned before, right? He's in control of his thought, speech, and action. Okay, so we have in Yiddishkeit, we have sur meira, va'asei tov. We say, move away from bad and do good, right? Okay, simply put, sur meira is lo yisaseh, negative commandments, asei tov is positive commandments. But really, it's more than that. It's all mitzvahs are, if a man doesn't put on tefillin, so tefillin is a mitzvah saseh. Not putting on tefillin is evil. So of course, sur meira, moving away from evil, obviously means he's putting on tefillin, right? And asay tov is not if you do the mitzvah, it's how you do the mitzvah, right? In other words, the good part, the positive. So it's safe to say that a person who's taka really a begani, okay, so he looks at a kal shebekalim. Okay, he's humble because he's not judging him, but it's much more than that. He has to say, what do you mean I'm not judging him? It's more, am I like him? And in other words, he's not being successful with the war, right? He's got a yetzer hara to look at things he shouldn't look, to do things he shouldn't do, whatever the case is. He's disrespectful, he doesn't care. Which means he's not overcoming the war. So the BINA should look at himself and say, one second, who said I'm overcoming the war? Now which war? So we'll grant him, the BINA, that he doesn't have a war, or not a big war. He's gotten used to overcoming the war when it comes to sur meira. Okay, so he doesn't do anything wrong. He's not in trouble, right? But are you really overcoming the war when it comes to doing good? What do you mean? For example, could go in, for example, are you really davening with kavanah, with real intention? Lishpoich nafshel lifnei Hashem, to pour out your soul before Hashem, b'chol koichem mamash, with all your strength, ad mitzuya nefesh, until the core of your being. You do that? Right? Maybe not, right? Uli lochem in gufay v'nafsha bamish, or you're fighting with your nefsha bamis, hamoinim kavana, which stand in the way of your kavana. Mil milchama atzuma, with a real war, ulevatsham, to break the nefsha bamis, ulekatzam gofra, to break it down to dust, so to speak. Koydem atfila, before davening. That's what it says in Shulchan Aruch. You're supposed to, before davening, you're supposed to reflect on the lowliness of man and the greatness of God, right? Shachris ba'arvis, both morning and night, yom every single day. Do you do that properly? Have you done it to the point where it's hard for you and you're overcoming the war? So it's a different war, but the bottom line is maybe you're just the same. You're exactly the same as culture. Not only you don't judge him because if you would be in the situation, you'd be the same. Maybe you are the same. Maybe you are the same. I mean, you're not the same. Obviously, you putting on tefillin for a long time. You're davening b'kavanah. You're doing the mitzvahs better than the culture b'kalim is doing it, right? Okay, I understand that. But are you fighting the war? Or are you not fighting the war just like he's not fighting the war? And it's a different war. Right? The Gama Shastra, even at the time of davening, you're really toiling and really pushing yourself. Be'yigias nefesh, be'yigias basar, mentally and physically. Like we can explain later by Richos at great length about what davening really looks like, right? Therefore he says, anyone who's not reached there yet, to really fight with his body, this unbelievable war. So anyone who's not reached that is not fulfilling the idea of fighting the war with the Yetzer Hara. To be subdued and to be surrendered because Hashem is looking at us in the fear of Hashem, right? So therefore you're the same. Saying to the BINA. That's why you come to this humility, be'emes. You're looking at someone who's in a different league to you, seemingly so much lower. The truth is, first of all, you can't judge him. Second of all, maybe you are like him. He's not successful in the mulchama. He should be, but he's not successful in the war against his Yetzer Hara, nor you. You're doing so many good things, yeah, but did you fight a war? This is the point. Everyone's got to fight a war. Everyone's got to really overcome the war, right? He talked about davening. He says, not only davening, he says lots of things. Same thing with benching after you eat. And you make a bracha before you eat. The kavanah, to really make them with proper intention. Of course you make a bracha every time you eat. Of course you bench every time you eat. But are you doing it like a kavanah, or are you just doing it? You know? Yeah. How much more so also the idea of kavanah, a mitzvah shmon, to have kavanah, to do the mitzvah for the right purpose, the right intention, etc., etc. That's brachas. The same thing with learning Torah. Right? Are you learning Torah? But are you pushing yourself? Are you learning much more than you want to, much more than you have a desire to? More than you're accustomed to? Are you having that war? Are you pushing your body? Are you pushing yourself to learn more than you think you're comfortable with? Maybe not. Right? And not just a little bit more, a lot more. Because you learn a little bit more than your nature, that's nice. That's a small war. Right? But you cannot compare it to a war against a fiery Yetzer Hara. So you're looking at this Kal Shavakalim who's not winning the war. But that's not the war of doing a little bit more, a little bit out of his comfort zone. You're looking at a big war that he's got, because he's like got a fiery Yetzer Hara and he's sitting there in the marketplace. No, are you fighting a war like that? Are you learning much more than you can? Okay. There was a great chassid, his name was Itcha the Masmid. I think I've told you about it before. Just to understand what the war means, right? Itcha the Masmid was a Yid. He lived in Russia. He was a chassid of the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe. He was killed in the war. He was killed in Holocaust. And he was in Poland actually afterwards, I think. And him and two other great chassidim were burnt in a shul together by the Nazis. Anyway, he was called the Itch the Masti because he never wasted a moment, right? But he also used to daven very long, so he wake up. He only ate once a day. He was very, very big. He was very, like, every mitzvah, everything was very, very, very careful with. And he'd wake up in the morning, he would learn Chassidus, and he would daven for hours and hours and hours. When he'd finish, I guess he'd have mincha, and then afterwards he would just wash for a small meal. He was very careful in kashrut. He used to travel a lot for the previous Rebbe, even traveled to America for a little bit. But he would always take his own little food with him. He didn't want to trust anyone's kashrut. It was like a very, you know. And then he would help people. He would then collect money for the Frierdiker Rebbe in America, and he would. He was such a great yid that he once came to America, and he came to a shul. He was davening and learning there, and people thought that he's the Rebbe, he's the Frierdiker Rebbe. He looked like such a holy Jew. Until he brought the news to him, he's not the Rebbe, he's just a chassid. So they said, "Oh, if that's what a chassid looks like, imagine what the Rebbe is, right?" Okay. So one time he stayed by someone in America, and because what he used to do, he would hardly sleep, and he would then, when he was finished all his davening and learning during the day, then he would learn at night a long time. And one time, I heard the story, I read it in his biography, there's a book about it. So this Yid was a simple Yid in America, and he hosted him, he was very happy to host him. And one time, this guy got up in the middle of the night, the place was like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, but he had to go to the bathroom, exactly. This host. And he saw that the door to the Masfir's room is a little bit open, and the light's on. So he thought maybe he forgot to put the lights. He made him a favor. So he was about to put his hand in and try to turn off the light, and he kind of peeked in, and he saw that Rabbi Masfir is sitting by a table, and his feet are in icy water to keep him up, so he shouldn't fall asleep. So he should just keep learning. That's what you call having a big war. Anyway, okay. He was a very interesting Yid. He like couldn't understand the American materialism. You have to understand, he was in Poland, right? It was before the war. He came to America, and he had a bit of a taste of America in those years. So he wrote back to home. He wrote a letter to, just to make contact. And he said, it's a famous line. He said, "Kan oichlim." He said, over here in America, you know what kind of places he says? Over here, people eat katlet mamish, actual meat. B'chol yoim, chas v'shalom, rachman al-Islam. couldn't understand the indulgence of America that people eat meat every day. Meat was something on Shabbos maybe. So. Anyway, that's the kind of Jew was. I'm just thinking when we're talking about a big war, not just that 2 minutes extra. It's also good. Everything extra is good, but talking about how you become humble. Are you fighting a big war against Israel? Okay. And then he says, and what's the difference? He says, what's the difference? The fact that you, the BINA, you're okay when it comes to not doing bad. Yeah, you don't have to, right? And the culture of Bakalim is not. But what's the difference if it's fighting the war in bad or fighting the war in good? Same thing, same opportunity to fight a war. It's all the same war for Hashem. So if you're not fighting a big war, so you need to be humble before the culture of Bakalim. Same the other mitzvahs, especially when it comes to monetary things, are you really pushing yourself? Are you really giving enough? And so on and so forth, right? Okay. Or maybe sometimes you mention something that might be derogatory to something else. I feel gnai kotan, even if it's very small, afshu emes, even if it's true. I feel nakas atzma, even to exonerate yourself. Quotes from the Gemara. The Gemara says, Rabbi's son, Reb Shimon, Rabbi once looked at a get that he said it wasn't written correctly. And his son had showed it to him, Reb Shimon, not Reb Shimon by Yehoy, Reb Shimon, the son of Rabbi. And he said to his father, it wasn't actually me, Lava no kasve, it wasn't me, El Yehuda Chayta kasve, it was the Yehuda, he wrote it. Otherwise, it's not me actually, we have to talk to him. But his father said to him, that's not right, he was a big tzaddik, but his father said to him, Kalech v'lashon hara. You should move away from Lashon Hara. It wasn't actually Mamash Lashon Hara, pointing to the technical laws of Lashon Hara, but it was a little bit of a thing. Like it says in the Gemara, it says that Reb Shimon fasted many, many days to atone for that one little thing that he did. Right? Like it says in the Gemara, being a Baal Basra. And many things like that. Many things like that. Even the BINA can find little things that maybe he doesn't do 100%, which he hasn't fought the war properly. Ubifrat, he says, and especially especially in things about sanctifying yourself in the area of things that are permitted. Right? We've learned that before. Actually, the rice also comes from the Torah. Like the Torah said, we have to be holy. In other words, have you fought the war properly? Like you never ever eat anything that's maybe a little bit what you don't need? Maybe you thought it was, but did you really reflect? Did you really do all that kind of stuff? That's all part of becoming humble, v'gam divrei surfim, even things which are only rabbinic, which we know according to the Medrash sometimes are stricter. Chamurim mid divrei Torah. Okay. That's part 2. Then comes part. So the first part is don't judge him. Second part is maybe you're the same. You look better, maybe the same. You're also not fighting the war. Part 3 is you're actually worse than him. Why? Right? First, second, why? Because Ella, Shakol Elo, all these things we said before, right? All these like deficiencies of the BINA might have all fall into the category of something actually that is this week's Parsha, really. Interesting, we're learning it today. You know, this week's Parsha is Parsha's Ekev, right? And the Torah says if you Ekev Tishman, if you keep the Ekev, the simple pshat of the pasuk is V'hoya Ekev Tishman. If you will listen to Hashem, you will get the reward, and Hashem will make the covenant. But it doesn't say im, when, or mishum. Use the word Ekev. So Rashi brings Ekev means a heel, and it refers to the mitzvahs that people tread on with their heel, right? There's a certain category of mitzvahs that, a person who's strict, a person who serves Hashem, obviously going to put on tefillin, obviously going to keep Shabbos, whatever, but then there's like little things that you just trample on, which is, you ignore, you forget, whatever the case is. That's the kind of category of things we're talking about making a comment about someone else, or eating more than you should, or all those kind of things, right? Or maybe not davening 100% with kavanah. And also what happens is with time, that you don't even see them as averos, you see them as things which are permissible. Because the Gemara says when you keep doing something, it becomes it becomes right. Now, therefore, like this. He says, the truth is, talking to the BINA again, right? Imu Yedea Sefer. Right? If you are knowledgeable, Umachzik b'Torah Hashem, and you uphold the Torah of Hashem, V'kirva selekim yechbas, and you're a person that really wants to be close to Hashem. That's what you are. That's why you're a BINA. You only don't want to do anything that's distance you from Hashem. That's what you are. You're a person that wants to become close to Hashem. Then you have no excuse. The Godel avoyna minasoi. Therefore, your avera is very great. The hashmosoi godloi, right? The kiflei kiflaim, and your guilt is much more, double. The masha nilcham, the fact that you're not fighting that war properly. Umisgabel al yitzrei be'erech b'chenes b'chom ha'atzum b'kanal. The fact that you're not fighting that war that we described before. Not only are you the same as the Kal Shebekalim because you're not fighting a war, but you're greater, you're worse. Why? At the end of the day, the Kal Shebekalim is in that environment. He's sitting with all the lowlifes of the world. He's in bad company anyways, in a bad environment, right? And he's not fighting the war. But you're not fighting the war, but you know about Hashem. You want to become close to Hashem. And you're not fighting the war, so you're much worse. Therefore, their guilt, the Kal Shebekalim's guilt, is not so strong. The fact that they don't conquer the Yetzirah, which by them it's burning strong. Right? That's the story with the Kal Shebekalim, but it's not as bad as the negativity of Kol HaKorev Hashem. To all those that are closer to Hashem, to His Torah and the service of Hashem. Right? And that's why Chazal tell us Al Amei Ha'aretz, about the Amaratzi, about the ignorant, or the Kal Shebekalim, similar thing, right? It says Shezdoinus Nasu Lehem Kishgogos. It says that their intentional averas are actually considered by Hashem as unintentional. Because they don't know better in a way. Now again, we're not talking about someone that doesn't know anything, because then it's maybe not even, then it's not even treated as an unintentional affair. But talking about a person who knows, he knows what to do, but he just doesn't do it, right? Because he's not in that space, right? So he's still held responsible. Al Rebbe says before, at the end of the day, what we said in the beginning of Tanya, that every person has the capacity for moyach shalit al lev, that the brain can rule the heart. Plus him also, and he's got to take responsibility, and he shouldn't excuse himself on any level. But the truth is that there is some favorable judgment. Bottom line is, they don't know better. They're in a bad company, they're in a bad environment, or the education, whatever the case is. Bottom line is that they're not in the space. They should learn and they should try harder and they should fight the war. All good. But at the end of the day, there's a chazal that says, but we see in the Gemara that Hashem will treat it like unintentional affairs, right? I mean, there's a concept in the Zohar that says that really at the end of the day, every Yid's Aveira is unintentional. No one really wants to be separate to Hashem. Okay, but that's on a more sort of subtle level. But on a this is a more tangible level. It is a little, because they don't know. It's hard. They're not in that zone. They're not in that mindset. But the Beinani, who is, and his whole life is he wants to be close to Hashem. And yet, upon real reflection, he realizes that he hasn't fought the war, at least not as strongly as we expect from the Kal Shebekalim. Because the Kal Shebekalim's war, if the Kal Shebekalim should choose to fight the war, it's going to be a huge war because he has an unbelievable Yetzirah and he's in a terrible environment. And the Beinani comes to a conclusion that he hasn't coming close to fight that war. He might be practically doing better, but he hasn't come close to fighting that war. The third thing he has to come to realization is that's actually worse. He's actually worse than the Kal Shebekalim, right? So it's three stages. Don't judge him. You might be the same, not only the same, but actually worse. And therefore, that's a way to become shval ruach, be humble, truly humble, in front of every single person. This is probably one of the hardest prokim to apply. You know?
Because in a way, it's a disincentive. I know it isn't.
Yeah. Why? Because it's no point, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, no, if you can get away with being marketplace guy.
Oh, this is sent to him. Yeah, but we're not talking about the Kol Shkolim. We're talking about the Benjamin.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's
Yeah, I understand. Of course, I understand that. But yeah, but it's not. That's why the Alter put that in. Like, I don't want this to be misinterpreted that it's an excuse for the guy in the marketplace. It's not. But we talk about the Benjamin who's looking at the marketplace guy, right? In other words, we talk about the person who's looking at other people that on the surface he is better than the other person. The Alter was saying, no, you're not. You can't judge. You can't judge. You might be the same and you might be worse. I mean, this fits into what Chazal tell us, right? Chazal tell us that generally Hashem is much stricter with tzaddikim. The more righteous you are, the more strict Hashem is with you because you know better. It's true. And that's not an incentive to become worse. That's just an incentive to try harder, right? But it does create humility. In other words, don't be humble. It's a very difficult thing because it's easy. The previous parak was easier. It's very easy between you and yourself to bash yourself up and to berate the nefesh habamis and understand and cry to Hashem that you really want to come closer and to deal with your timtum halev like that. But when it comes to how you are with other people, that's much more difficult. That's just the fact. I tell a story about a person who was considered very humble in a shtetl. So the guy was very shtetl. What did he say? He wanted to make himself very, very humble. So he came before Yom Kippur and he got up in front of the whole shul and he started saying, I sinned, I'm nothing, I'm a nothing, I'm a nothing. So some simple guy saw that was the way to do tshuva. He also got up in front of the shul and he also started saying, I'm nothing, I'm nothing. So this other guy looked at him in this day and said, Eichmer, I'm nothing. What kind of nothing are you? Like, it was like kind of chutzpah. It's like, it belongs to me kind of thing, right? So that's like the joke. That's not really humble, right? So this is the thing, yeah. But again, we always say this, and I always like to explain this, that this is a very tough reflection. And as I told you before, there was that chassid he said it took him 20 years to actually really internalize this. It's one thing having the mindset, but it's another thing to actually feel that way. And by the way, it's a complicated thing on many levels. First of all, there is another concept that we're also supposed to inspire other people, right? To the point that there is a mitzvah in the Torah, right? There's a mitzvah in the Torah of reprimanding other people, right? Now, of course, you have to do it nicely and so on, but it's, in other words, if I'm nothing and I'm worse than the other person, so why should I get him to put on tefillin? Why should I get him to keep Shabbos? Why should I get him to eat kosher, right? Let me work on myself. It's not the way it works. Two things don't contradict each other. In other words, you inspire someone else because that's my job. Everyone's job. We call this our ravens ever there. We're responsible for each other. We have an neshama. Sometimes we have a principle that says that a prisoner cannot free themselves and needs someone else to open the door and free them. So therefore, if we see that another yid could do a mitzvah that they're not doing, and we have the opportunity to inspire them to do the mitzvah, we have to do that. Because every yid should do all the mitzvahs, right? But that doesn't mean as I do that, because I'm thinking I'm doing it because I'm better, I do the mitzvah. That's not the point. The point is you could be much greater than me, but still I have a responsibility to expose you to doing a mitzvah, to inspire you to become better. But for myself, I need to understand that doesn't mean that before that person does the mitzvah, he's lower than me. He's not. It could be that he's fighting against Sahara, could be that he's war against Yisrael, he's even better than me. Maybe that step that he took and the progress he's making is better than my progress. Right? So the two things don't contradict. And secondly, what we're learning in this parak, in fact the last two parakim, again does not contradict the idea of simcha. Right? And we're going to talk about it in the next parak also. How you can have that simcha. In other words, we can have both things together. We can feel that humility, that lowliness. We can break the nefesh habamis from time to time. We can really berate our nefesh habamis, as explained in the last parak, and we can feel very distant, and yet we can be tremendously besimcha, because at the end of the day, deep down, our real identity is the nefesh elokis. That's who we really are, b'pnimis, in a more internal way. And even the part of me that's not, and that's so low, but it's Hashem that He wants me. He wants me to do His mitzvah. He wants me to say Tehillim. He wants me to daven. He wants me to put on tefillin. He wants me to light Shabbos candle. That's this nothing. Hashem wants this nothing. In fact, later on in Tanya, a little bit later, he'll explain why actually brings even more simcha. Because the whole point of creation is dira b'tachtoinim, having a dwelling place down here, right? Like I think one person once said, there's a Gemara that says, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. A person would say, the world was created for me. And that's a difficult passage because it seems like arrogant. Well, the world was created for me. Okay, so many things I've spoken about it before on Thursday morning, what it means, but there are many different interpretations. But the Chassidim used to say, what's Pshat? The Chassid once said like this. He said, what does it mean that the world was created for me? Very simple. So Hashem wanted to make a dirabah, wanted to make a dwelling place in the lowest world, meaning the lowest world, that there's nothing lower than this world, right? So therefore, in this world itself, they can be higher and lower. So the more lower you are, the more you are the intention of the creation. So since there's nothing lower than me, so therefore, I'm the cover. The world was created for me. When I can bring Hashem even into this lowliness, that's fulfilling Hashem's thing, right? Because at the end of the day, right, it goes like that. Because at the end of the day, we once spoken about this. If you go through this parak and you start to feel bad, then it's missing the point. Because it's not about you. It's about you doing whatever you can to connect to the fire of the neshama. But it's about you serving Hashem. So even if I come to the conclusion that I'm the lowest of the low, let's say, right? And I'm lower than every other people, and I internalize this message, so I'll break the nefesh habamis a little bit, but that shouldn't stop me from doing a mitzvah with simcha. It's not about me. It's not about me being a good guy, a bad guy. It's not about me. It's about Hashem's ratzon. Hashem wants you to do a mitzvah, you should do the mitzvah and serve Him properly. A method of that is feeling humble, so you should feel humble too. But it's not a contradiction to the simcha of doing a mitzvah. Every time you do a mitzvah, you come close to Hashem. Every mitzvah is a connection to Hashem. You look confused, Rabbi.
No.
Okay, good. And that was always the perspective of great Chassidim, right? I mean, some of them I saw. They were always unbelievable simcha. Not because they didn't understand this part, Tanya, they did. I always bring a Mendel Futter first. He was the most humble guy. He was once, I saw a video of him once, he was once traveling in California. He lived in Eretz Yisrael. He was once traveling in California. He was also used to sometimes go and collect money for the yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. And he stayed with people, say, he arrived in a place in California that was a very empty, like it was not a very Jewish town, but there was a Chabad shliach there. And he stayed with him for him and Rabbi Reichel, two great Chassidim. Different style, but two great Chassidim. So no minyan or anything, but he stayed there. So he got up in the morning and he started to prepare for davening. He started very beautifully. I remember him davening. He was like that. And this shliach put up a video camera and he started videoing him. He wanted his children to see. Actually, I'm happy that it's a beautiful video to see. How he prepares for davening and how he davens. It's beautiful. At the beginning, this chassid, Rabbi Fotovas, sees that he's videoing him. He says, "Well, what are you doing?" He says, "That's superficiality. It's chitzonis. He says, why are you doing this?" So the guy tries to be a smart aleck. So he says to him, "I don't know what they used to video the Rebbe davening." He says, "The Rebbe. I'm just nothing." And he meant it like that. He says, "Just this is external stuff." He says, so the guy was challenging him. He says to him, "But what do you mean you're nothing? The Rebbe always just talk about the greatness of every Yid." He says, "There's a chai." He says, "Listen to me." He says, "Of course the Rebbe has to say that. That's the Rebbe. But I know that ich bin garnished. I'm nothing." But he meant it. It wasn't like you could see he meant it. But he was full of simcha because he knew that this garnished Hashem wants me to daven to him.
Because it's related to purpose.
Here. In other words, because he was humble, it goes together actually. In other words, if you know you're nothing and you feel upset, then you're not humble. It's actually an arrogance. What do you mean? Like you're upset because you're not something. Why is the you so important here? Understand? You got to know you're nothing because you're nothing. Because Hashem is everywhere and you're nothing, and you've done things you shouldn't have done. You have enough shabamis and you clip, and therefore that'll let once you know you're nothing, it'll unblock the nefesh shabamis to let in the fire of Hashem. But that shouldn't disturb your simcha. He at the same minute he was smiling. He said, "I know I'm a garnish," and he meant it. But Hashem wants this garnish to daven for him, and He wants you to daven with simcha. He didn't say that, but that was the implied message. Understand? So anyway. That was always the perspective. All right, we're on track here. I want to finish to a certain period before for Elul, and then we'll take a break, but it'll be a good place to stop. I think we're on track. Good.